Welcome, students. We will be talking about the poem Rabbi Ben Ezra by Robert Browning today. Robert Browning, we have read earlier also. He is known for his dramatic monologue and he is one of the major English poets of the Victorian era. Since he is known for his mastery over dramatic monologue, which is a form in which psychological portraiture is important and it is meant to depict the psychological inner conflict of the characters. The most noted and notable work of Browning was The Ring and the Book, which is a story of a Roman murder trial in 12 books. Before we begin the poem Rabbi Ben Ezra, let's have a brief overview of Robert Browning's life and works. In 1835, Browning published Paracelsus, and in 1840, he published Sordello. Both the poems dealt with the men of great ability who strive to reconcile the demands of their personalities in this world. Paracelsus was received well with the critics, but Sordello uh, was not accepted and it was universally declared incomprehensible. Browning devoted his major energies for few further years to verse drama, a form which had already been adopted for Strafford. And in during the period of 1841 to 46, in a series of pamphlets under the title of Bells and Pomegranates, he published seven more plays in verse. These were the earlier works, except Stratford, which were printed by at the expense, the family's expense. And Browning enjoyed writing for the stage, but he was not very successful in the theatre because his strength it only lay in depicting that he was good at presenting action in character rather than characters in action. So he did not succeed and was not very successful as a playwright. Now, in 1845, the first phase of Browning's life comes to an end. And in the same year, he meets Elizabeth Barrett. And the collection, poems, Barrett included some lines which praised Browning and also thanked him. And in May, when they met, they felt that they have to live together. But somehow the dominant, selfish jealousy and fond of his daughter of Barrett Browning's father uh, became a hurdle in their marriage. And in the meantime, he fell ill, and the doctors advised him to be taken to Italy, and they could not meet, and so they only corresponded. But they finally they married secretly in the year 1846. Now, throughout the married life, Browning had spent his time in France and England, although there was home in Italy, and they had a very meager income, so they produced little poetry. Browning actually produced very little poetry during his married life. And during this period, in 1849, he published Christmas Eve and Easter Day, which was an examination of different attitudes towards Christianity. And Browning's considerable work in prose is considered to be Men and Women. And this was a collection of 51 poems where we have dramatic lyrics and the great monologues known as the famous monologue, Frale Pilipi, and how it strikes a contemporary, etc. Now, with this volume, Men and Women, it did not sale, had a great sale, but then many of the reviews were very unfavorable and very unhelpful for Browning, and he was very disappointed. So, in the following years, he wrote very little and sketching and modeling in clay day by day. He did that work. And at last, due to Barrett Browning's health, which had remarkably restored, she died. And in the coming year only, he returned slowly to London with his younger son. Now, the first task when he came back to England with his son was to prepare the collection of poems written by Barrett Browning, titled Last Poems, to be published. And another collection of poems was again called in 1863, wherein the poem Pauline was not included. And in the next collection, named Dramatis Personae, which included Ab Vogler and Rabbi Ben Ezra, he had reached two editions. And it was now clear that Browning was finally gaining some kind of a recognition for his poetry and being recognized by critics also. Now, in the period 1868 to 69, he published his the greatest work, as we said earlier, The Ring and the Book, which was based on the proceedings in a murder trial in Rome in 1698. It was a very grand work, both in plan and execution, and it was well received by the critics. And he was established, Browning, this work actually established Browning as one of the important literary figures of his age. Now, after this, rest of his life, he was very much in demand in London society, and he used to spend his summers with friends in France, Scotland, Switzerland, etc. And the most important of his last works were long narrative and dramatic poems. Now, this is how Browning is known to us, for his long narrative and dramatic poems, often dealing with contemporary themes. And he wrote a number of poems on classical subjects also. He published two books at the towards the end of his career. One was an elegy dedicated to the friend N.A. Smith, and other was the book which discussed the ideas that influenced him during his youth time. He died in 1889 because of some illness. Now, coming to this poem, which has been prescribed in our syllabus, Rabi Ben Ezra, which is a dramatic monologue, and we know by now what are the salient features of a dramatic monologue. We will read the poem and understand the various elementary features which make it a dramatic monologue. And we must remember the collection of the poems in which it was published, that it was published in Dramatis Personae, published in 1864. So we have this poem Rabbi Ben Ezra in our syllabus, which we will take up. It's a lengthy poem,